The palace of the Dragon Emperor was silent that night. It was not the silence of peace but of fear. Every corridor, every hall, every torch that burned against the dark stone walls carried the weight of sorrow. Servants whispered, guards stood stiff, and nobles bowed their heads. Inside the tallest tower, the emperor's only son lay close to death. The prince had once been the pride of the empire. His scales shone brighter than fire, his eyes were full of life, and his roar carried across the mountains. But now he was weak. His skin was pale, his fire gone, his breath short and heavy. He had not spoken in days. His body shook under the blankets, as if a storm lived inside him. The healers had tried everything. Dragon healers came from far kingdoms. They burned incense, mixed herbs, whispered ancient spells, and poured their strength into him. Nothing worked. The sickness was too strange, too deep. Some said it was poison. Others said it was a curse. And some feared it was a punishment from the gods themselves. The emperor stood at the foot of the bed. His golden armor shone, but his eyes were dark. His fists were tight. He was the most powerful dragon ruler in history, feared across worlds, yet at that moment he looked powerless. His son, his heir, was slipping away, and no power of dragonkind could stop it. "Find a cure," the emperor growled to his court. "If my son dies, I will burn the stars themselves." His voice shook the chamber, but no answer came. The healers lowered their heads. They had failed. The empress wept quietly, her claws pressed against her face. She whispered prayers to the ancient dragons above, but even her prayers seemed lost. The nobles murmured among themselves, fear running through their voices. If the prince died, the empire would fall into chaos. War would follow. Enemies were already watching, waiting for the throne to weaken. In the corner of the grand hall, far away from the golden thrones and noble dragons, stood a group of humans. They were slaves, brought from distant lands to serve the empire. Among them was one young man. His clothes were torn, his face dirty, and no one knew his name. To the court, he was nothing, a nobody. Yet his eyes did not look away from the dying prince. He watched with quiet focus as the healers failed again and again. He saw the rise and fall of the prince's chest, the strange color on his lips, the way his body trembled. He noticed things the dragons did not. The night grew darker. Thunder rolled outside the palace walls, and heavy rain fell upon the empire. Inside, the prince's breath slowed. His body arched in pain, then fell still for long moments. The healers panicked. One shouted that the end was near. The empress screamed the prince's name. The emperor roared so loudly the walls shook. And then, silence. All stood frozen, fearing the prince had taken his last breath. The torches flickered. The air felt heavy. Hope was gone. It was in that silence that the human stepped forward. His steps echoed softly on the stone floor. Dragons turned their heads in disbelief. Who dared move when the emperor's rage filled the air? Guards tightened their grips on their spears. The human kept walking until he stood only a few feet from the bed. His head was lowered, his hands trembling, but his voice was steady. "Let me try," he said. The court erupted in laughter and anger. Dragons hissed, nobles shouted. "A human! Cure the prince!" "Impossible!" one cried. Another spat, "Throw him to the fire for his arrogance." Guards stepped forward to drag him away, but the emperor raised his hand. The hall fell quiet again. The emperor's golden eyes narrowed as he stared at the human. "You." His voice was low and sharp. "A slave. A nobody dares to speak in my court." The human bowed lower but did not step back. His heart raced, but his words came clear. "I have seen this sickness before. Not in dragons, but in men. If you allow me, I can try to help him." The court gasped. The healers sneered. "Lies!" one shouted. "He seeks attention before his death." Another barked, "A human's hands cannot heal a dragon prince." The emperor's eyes burned. He took one step forward, his shadow covering the human. "If you fail," the emperor growled, "I will tear you apart myself." The human lifted his head slightly. His eyes met the emperor's, filled with fear but also with a strange courage. "Then let me die trying," he said. For a long moment, the chamber was still. The thunder outside seemed to wait for the emperor's answer. Finally, with a slow nod, the emperor spoke. "Very well. But know this, if you bring more harm to my son, your death will not be quick." The guards stepped back. The human exhaled softly, his chance granted. The nobles muttered in anger, The healers shook their heads, and the Empress clutched her son tighter, her tears falling. The human walked toward the prince. He could feel the heat of the dragon's fever, see the veins of poison under his skin, and hear the faint, weak breath. He reached out slowly, carefully, as every dragon eye in the room watched him. The future of the empire now balanced on the hands of a human nobody. And in that moment, the dying prince's fingers twitched, just enough to show he was still alive. The court gasped. The emperor's eyes widened. The human whispered softly, words only he understood. The story had just begun. The hall of the Dragon Emperor was still filled with shock. The prince had moved, just a twitch of his fingers, but enough to break the silence of despair. Every noble, every guard, every servant had seen it. The boy was not yet gone. And it had happened the moment the human spoke. Whispers filled the chamber. It cannot be. Just luck. A trick. The healers shook their heads and muttered excuses, but their eyes betrayed fear. None of them had been able to do what this nameless human had done, bring the dying prince even the smallest sign of life. The emperor stared down at the human with burning eyes. His voice was heavy with warning. Step forward, slave. You dared speak in my court. You dared touch my son. Now you will prove your words, or you will die where you stand. The human's heart pounded, but he forced himself to keep calm. His hands were still shaking, but his voice was steady. I will need herbs, water, cloth, and no one must interfere. The court exploded in outrage. Dragons roared, their scales flashing with anger. How dare he give orders? Shouted one noble. He insults our healers, cried another. The guards gripped their weapons, ready to strike. But the emperor raised his claw and silenced them all. Bring him what he asks, the emperor commanded. If he fails, he dies. The guards obeyed, though their eyes were full of hate. Soon, a small table was placed near the prince's bed, with bowls of water, cloth, and herbs. The human stepped forward and began his work, while dozens of dragon eyes followed his every move. He placed a damp cloth on the prince's forehead, whispering quietly, "The fever is drowning him. His body is burning itself from within." He crushed some herbs between his palms and mixed them into the water. The smell spread through the room, sharp and strange to the dragons. One of the healers sneered. What nonsense is this? He thinks weeds can cure a dragon prince. Another whispered, this is madness. The human ignored them. His eyes stayed fixed on the prince, watching each breath, each flicker of movement. He had seen this illness before, not in dragons, but in villages back on Earth, where fever took the weak and the young. Many had died, but some had survived with care. He remembered every detail. The Empress, her face pale with worry, stepped closer. Can you truly save him? She whispered, her voice trembling. The human lowered his head respectfully. I do not know if I can. But I will try, with all I have. The Emperor's golden eyes never left the human. His claws dug into the stone floor. If your hands bring harm, your blood will paint these walls, he said coldly. Time passed slowly in the chamber. The human worked carefully, cooling the prince's body, feeding him drops of herb water, wiping away the sweat. The prince stirred faintly, his lips moving as if in a dream. A faint sound escaped him, too soft for the dragons to hear, but the human heard it. Why, the prince whispered weakly, why are you helping me? The human leaned closer and spoke softly, though his words carried through the tense silence. Because no one else dared. The court shifted uneasily. Dragons exchanged looks, their pride wounded. For centuries, dragons had ruled over humans as slaves and tools. Now, one human spoke with courage in front of the emperor himself. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, thunder rolled across the skies, but inside the chamber all eyes stayed locked on the human and the prince. At last, the prince opened his eyes. Only a little, only for a moment, but they opened. His gaze was weak, unfocused, but alive. The Empress gasped and fell to her knees beside the bed. Tears streamed down her face. He lives! He lives! She cried. The Emperor's chest rose with a deep breath. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. But that hope was quickly replaced by suspicion. He turned his sharp gaze back to the human. You, the Emperor growled. What trick is this? What game are you playing? The human bowed low. No trick, no game. Only care. He is not healed yet. The sickness still burns inside him. But he will live, if I am allowed to continue. The emperor's eyes narrowed. Around him, the nobles erupted in fury. "This is a disgrace," shouted one. "A human should not touch the heir of dragons." Another spat, "Kill him now before he curses the prince further." One of the elder healers stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. "My emperor, this is dangerous. If you let this slave continue, you risk shame upon all dragonkind. We will be mocked by our enemies. Do not allow it." The emperor listened in silence, his jaw tight. His gaze moved from the healers to the nobles, then back to the human standing calmly by his son's bed. At last, the emperor raised his claw and silenced the court once more. His voice was like thunder. "Enough. My son lives because of this human. Until the prince is well or dead, he will remain. If any of you dare to interfere, you will answer to me." The hall fell silent. The nobles bowed, their faces twisted in anger. The healers lowered their heads in shame. None dared oppose the emperor's command. The human stepped back, his heart racing. He had won a chance, but also earned the hatred of the court. Dozens of dragon eyes burned into him, full of scorn and fury. He knew what they were thinking: if the prince survives, our pride dies. And in the shadows of the hall, one dragon noble whispered to another, his eyes sharp with malice. "We cannot let a human rise. If he saves the prince, it will destroy us. He must not succeed." The human did not hear those words. He only looked at the prince, who had fallen back into a weak but steady sleep. For the first time, the young man felt a spark of hope. Perhaps he could save him. Perhaps he could change everything. But he did not yet know, the greatest danger was not the sickness inside the prince. It was the enemies inside the court, who would do anything to see him fail. The night dragged on inside the emperor's palace. Outside, the storm raged with thunder and rain, but inside the chamber, the true storm was silent and heavy. The dragon prince lay weak, his breathing shallow, his skin damp with sweat. Beside him, the human nobody worked tirelessly. He dipped cloths into cool water, pressed them to the prince's forehead, and whispered words of comfort. To the watching dragons, his actions looked simple, even foolish. But the humans saw details they could not. The prince's veins were dark, his lips pale, and his body shook as if fighting two enemies at once. "The sickness is strange," the human murmured softly. "It is not only fever. Something else poisons him." The emperor stood nearby, arms crossed, his golden eyes fixed on every move. Around the chamber, nobles whispered angrily. Their pride was wounded. They could not accept that their healers had failed where a human dared to try. One noble leaned closer to another. "If this boy succeeds, it will shame us all. Something must be done." The other nodded darkly. "Perhaps something will be." The human did not hear them. He was focused on the prince. He checked the young dragon's chest, listening to each breath. The boy's body radiated heat, but beneath that heat was another force, something sharp, something foreign. It was poison. He had seen it before. Back on Earth, in a forgotten village, men had fallen after drinking from a poisoned well. Their bodies burned with fever while their veins turned dark. He remembered how the elders had treated them, with herbs, water, and rest. Many had died, but some had lived. He had sworn never to forget. Now that memory was his only weapon. The human mixed crushed herbs into a bowl of water. The smell rose sharply, bitter, earthy, and strange to dragon senses. He dipped a cloth and pressed it gently to the prince's lips, letting drops fall into his mouth. The empress gasped. "What are you giving him?" she asked, fear and hope mixing in her voice. "Medicine," the human said softly. "Not from dragons, from men." The emperor growled low. "If it harms him, you will pay with your life." The human bowed slightly. "I understand." The drops slid down the prince's throat. At first, nothing happened. Then his body tensed. His chest rose sharply, and his eyes flickered open for a brief second. He coughed weakly, a sound that echoed in the silent hall. Gasps filled the room. Even the healers, who had mocked him, stared in shock. The boy was responding. But then, the prince's body shivered violently. His claws scratched at the bed, his breath fast and harsh. The empress screamed and reached for him, but the human stopped her gently. "Do not touch him now," he said quickly. "The poison is fighting back. His body must push it out." The court erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted, guards rushed forward. "He is killing him," one cried. "Stop this madness." The Emperor raised his claw and roared, silencing the hall. His eyes burned into the human. "Explain yourself. Now." The human turned, his voice steady though his heart raced. "The sickness is poison. It hides under the fever. If I do nothing, he will die tonight. If I treat him, the poison will fight. His body will suffer before it heals. But it is the only way." The Emperor's gaze darkened. "And if you are wrong?" "Then I will die before dawn," the human answered simply. The hall fell quiet again. All eyes turned back to the prince, who twisted in his bed, his weak body shaking. His scales glowed faintly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. 4 dragons, the sight was unbearable. Their heir was in the hands of a human slave, suffering because of his strange methods. The Empress wept into her claws. The nobles whispered furiously, some demanding the human's death. But the Emperor stood still, his gaze heavy with both anger and hope. The human wiped sweat from his brow and leaned closer to the prince. He whispered softly, words meant only for the boy. "Fight. Do not let it take you. You are stronger than this." Minutes stretched like hours. The prince's body convulsed again and again. At last, with a final shiver, he stilled. His breathing slowed, then steadied, weak but even. His eyes remained closed, but his face relaxed for the first time in days. The human placed a hand on the prince's chest, feeling the faint but steady rhythm. Relief washed over him. "He is still alive," he whispered. The Empress cried out in joy, falling to her knees beside the bed. The Emperor's jaw tightened, his golden eyes softening for a brief moment. But the court was not pleased. The nobles hissed, their voices sharp with anger. "He cannot be trusted," one shouted. "He uses strange magic," another accused. "If the prince dies tomorrow, we will all be fools." In the shadows, one noble slipped quietly from the hall. His eyes glowed with malice. He would not wait for the prince to die naturally. If the human's treatment was saving him, then the human must be stopped. The human did not see the danger moving against him. He only sat by the prince's side, watching carefully, making sure each breath came steady. His hands trembled, but inside he felt something he had not felt in years, hope. The prince shifted slightly in his sleep, his lips parting. In a weak, broken whisper, he spoke a single word. "Brother." The human froze. He looked at the boy, shocked. Had he truly heard it? Or was it only his imagination? The Empress gasped. "He spoke," she cried. The Emperor's eyes widened, his heart pounding in silence. His son had spoken, after days of silence. And the word he had spoken was to a human. The hall erupted with cries of disbelief. The healers shouted in anger. The nobles trembled with fury. 4 dragons, it was the greatest insult. For the human, it was the greatest burden. And as the storm raged outside, one truth became clear: the battle was no longer just against sickness. It was against the hatred of a kingdom. The storm had passed outside, but inside the palace the storm had only begun. The Dragon Prince slept quietly, his breathing steady for the first time in many nights. The Empress sat by his side, her claws gently brushing his hair, tears of relief still wet on her cheeks. The Emperor stood tall, silent and watchful. He would not admit it, but his heart carried a weight lifted: his son was still alive. But the court was restless. The nobles gathered at the far end of the hall, their voices sharp with anger. They whispered, argued, and hissed like snakes. To them, the sight of a human slave tending the heir of dragons was an insult greater than any wound. "He should not be near the prince," one noble spat. "This is blasphemy," another growled. "Our enemies will laugh when they hear that a human nobody saved the son of the Emperor." "If he lives, our pride dies," muttered a third, his eyes narrow with hate. The elder healers joined the whispers. Their faces were pale, their pride shattered. For centuries, they had been honored as the keepers of dragon knowledge. Now, before the Emperor himself, they had failed, and a nameless human had succeeded. Their shame burned hotter than fire. The Emperor turned his gaze on them. "Do any of you dare challenge me?" he asked, his voice low but heavy like thunder. Silence filled the chamber. None dared answer. But their silence was not loyalty, it was plotting. The human sat near the prince's bed, his body tired but his mind alert. He could feel the stares of hatred on his back. He knew he had made enemies that night, enemies with power far beyond his own. Yet he could not leave the boy's side. The prince was still weak, still fighting the poison inside. If he left him now, all would be lost. Hours passed. The prince stirred faintly, his lips moving in whispers too weak to hear. The human leaned closer, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Rest," he murmured softly. "You will not die tonight." But in the shadows, one figure moved silently. A noble dragon, tall and cruel, slipped closer with a cup in hand. He approached the human, his face hidden in the dim torchlight. "The boy needs strength," the noble said smoothly, offering the cup. "This drink will heal him faster. It is an old remedy of dragons." The human looked at the cup, then at the noble. The liquid inside shimmered strangely, almost too bright under the torchlight. His instincts warned him. He remembered poisons like this, silent, deadly, masked as medicine. He bowed his head politely but shook his hand. "No. He cannot take this now. It will harm him." The noble's eyes flashed with fury. "How dare you refuse me, human? Do you think you know better than dragons? I should crush you where you stand." Before the human could answer, the emperor's voice cut through the hall. "Enough." His golden eyes burned into the noble. "Did I not give this human authority until my son is healed? Stand down, or face me." The noble froze, his teeth clenched. He bowed stiffly, retreating into the shadows. But his glare promised revenge. The human exhaled softly, his suspicion confirmed. Not everyone wanted the prince saved. Some wanted him dead, if only to destroy the human who dared rise above his place. Later, when the court grew quiet, the human sat alone by the prince's side. The empress had fallen asleep in her chair, her hand still resting near her son. The emperor stood by the window, staring out into the dark horizon. The human whispered to himself, his eyes on the boy. "They will try to stop me, but I will not let them. You will live, no matter the cost." Suddenly, the prince's eyes opened. They were weak but clearer than before. He looked at the human, his lips trembling. "Why do they hate you?" The human hesitated, then answered softly. "Because I am not supposed to stand here. To them, I am only a servant. But to me, you are just a boy who needs help." The prince blinked slowly. His voice was faint, but his words carried weight. "You are not nobody." The human froze. He remembered the word the boy had whispered earlier, "brother." His chest tightened with emotion he had long forgotten. But their moment was broken by a sudden crash. The doors of the hall burst open, and a group of nobles stormed in with guards at their side. Their leader, the same noble who had offered the poisoned cup, raised his claw and shouted, "This has gone far enough. We will not allow a human slave to hold power over the heir of dragons. Emperor, your judgment is clouded by grief. We demand this human be cast out, or executed before our honor is destroyed." The hall erupted with voices, shouts, and roars. The empress gasped awake, clutching her son. The guards raised their weapons. The human stood frozen, caught between fury and fear. The emperor's eyes blazed. His roar shook the chamber. "You dare question me in my own hall?" But the nobles did not bow. Their leader snarled, his claws sparking with flame. "If you will not act, then we will. The human dies tonight." They stepped forward, fire burning in their throats. The human backed away slowly, his heart racing. The prince tried to rise, his weak hand reaching out, but his strength failed. The hall filled with chaos, the air thick with fire and rage. And as the human stood cornered, the truth struck him. Saving the prince's life was not his only battle. Now, he had to survive the fury of dragons who would rather see him dead than admit he mattered. The dragon court had never been so silent. The marble halls, usually filled with the echo of dragon wings and proud voices, now carried only whispers. Everyone's eyes were on the young human, Elias, and the dragon emperor's son, Kale. The boy, once pale and near death, now walked with a strength that shocked the elders. His steps were steady, his breathing clear, and his eyes, bright with life. It was nothing less than a miracle, and every dragon in the chamber knew who had made it possible. Elias, the human nobody. But not everyone was pleased. "This is dangerous," hissed Elder Draven, his scaled face tight with anger. "If a human holds the cure to our prince, then what does that say about us? Have we fallen so low?" The words cut through the air like fire. Other elders shifted uneasily, but none dared to interrupt. Elias felt the weight of their stares, heavy like mountains pressing down on him. He was only a simple cleaner, not a warrior, not a healer. Yet somehow, fate had pushed him into this impossible place. Kale stood beside him, a hand resting gently on Elias's shoulder. You speak of danger, Elder Draven, but I speak of truth. I was dying. None of your wisdom, none of your power, could save me. But he, Kale's voice grew strong, echoing through the hall. He gave me life when all hope was gone. The crowd murmured. Some dragons bowed their heads in shame, others looked away. The truth was undeniable. Elias had done what no dragon could. Still, Draven's eyes burned with hate. He leaned forward, wings twitching. And what happens when humans see this? When they learn that their fragile kind can cure us? They will rise against us. They will use this power to control the mighty dragons. Do you not see? He is a threat. Gasps filled the chamber. Elias's heart raced. He had no plan, no words prepared, but he felt Kale's grip tighten on his shoulder. The young prince wasn't afraid, and somehow, that gave Elias strength too. I never wanted power, Elias said, his voice trembling but clear. I never wanted to stand here. I only wanted to help. If saving Kale is a crime, then I will bear that crime. But don't mistake kindness for a weapon. For a moment, silence ruled. Then, to everyone's shock, the emperor himself rose from his throne. His golden scales shimmered like sunlight breaking through a storm. His eyes, deep and ancient, locked onto Elias. The human speaks truth, the emperor rumbled. I sent my healers, my generals, even the stars themselves, searching for a cure. None could help. And yet this boy, weak in body but strong in spirit, succeeded. He turned to the court, his voice sharp as thunder. If any here still doubt his worth, then you doubt my judgment. The chamber shook with his words. Elders bowed, though some with stiff reluctance. Elias felt his knees weaken, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. The Dragon Emperor had defended him. But even as relief washed over him, Elias saw Draven's eyes narrow with silent rage. That hatred would not vanish. It would grow, waiting for the moment to strike. Later that night, as the palace grew quiet, Elias sat alone in the garden. The air smelled of smoke and jasmine. Stars glittered above like shards of broken glass. He thought of his old life, sweeping floors, ignored by all. Now he stood in the heart of power, surrounded by creatures who could crush him with a single breath. Do you regret it? A voice asked. Elias turned. Kale stood there, cloaked in silver robes, the mark of a prince reborn. His face glowed with health, though his eyes carried a weight beyond his years. Elias shook his head slowly. No. But I am afraid. Not for me, for you. They will come for us. Kale nodded, his expression grave. Elder Draven will not stop. He will spread poison with his words. But you and I, we will face it together. He sat beside Elias, the stone bench creaking under his weight. Do you know what dragons fear most? Elias glanced at him. Losing power. Kale smiled faintly. Change. And you, Elias, are change. You are proof that strength is not only in fire and wings. It is in heart. Before Elias could answer, the sound of wings thundered overhead. Guards rushed into the garden, their armor glinting. Your Highness, one cried. An attack on the northern wall, Draven supporters. Kale leapt to his feet, his eyes blazing. Elias felt his blood run cold. The court's divisions had turned into open war. Dragons were fighting dragons, because of him. The guard looked at Elias with fear and suspicion. The human must be kept safe, he said, though his tone carried no warmth. If Draven gets to him, all is lost. Kale turned to Elias, his jaw set. This is only the beginning. Stay close to me, Elias. The fire has only just been lit. And with that, the night erupted in roars and flame. The Empire was about to burn. The night sky was on fire. Dragons clashed in the air, their roars shaking the heavens. Sparks of flame lit the palace walls as the northern towers burned. The war had begun. Elias stood frozen in the garden, watching shadows of massive wings circle above. He had never seen such fury, such destruction. The Empire was tearing itself apart, and deep inside, he knew it was because of him. Kale grabbed his arm. Stay with me. We cannot let Draven take control. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with a prince's fury. Guards rushed in, wings spread wide. Your Highness, we must escort you to the safe halls. Kale shook his head. No. If I hide, Draven wins. This ends tonight. The guards hesitated. Elias's heart pounded. He wanted to beg Kale to stay hidden, to survive, but he saw something in the prince's eyes. Kale was no longer the dying boy lying helpless in bed. He was the Dragon Emperor's son, alive and strong, and ready to fight for his people. "Then I go with you," Elias said, his voice shaking but firm. The guards stared at him like he was mad. "A human? In battle?" one scoffed. But Kale silenced them with a glare. "This human is no ordinary man. He is my strength. He does not leave my side." Together they moved through the burning corridors of the palace. Smoke choked the air, and the cries of battle grew louder. The throne chamber loomed ahead, its golden doors torn open. Inside, Elder Draven stood at the center, his scales black as obsidian, wings spread wide like a shadow over the throne itself. Dozens of his followers lined the walls, their eyes glowing with hate. At the far end, the Dragon Emperor fought against Draven's soldiers, his golden scales slashed with wounds. Blood stained the marble floor. Draven's voice echoed like thunder. "Behold your savior, the sickly prince, kept alive by a human rat." His eyes locked onto Elias with venom. "This is the future Kale promises you, a future where dragons bow to men." The chamber shook with angry roars from Draven's side. Elias trembled under the weight of so many hateful eyes. But Kale stepped forward, his chest rising with power. "No. This is the future I promise, a future where strength is not measured by blood or wings, but by courage." Elias did not bow to death. He stood where no dragon dared. "That is why he saved me." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Draven laughed, a sound like cracking stone. "Pretty words, boy. But let us see if your human courage can stand against dragon fire." In a flash, he lunged. His wings tore through the air, his claws aimed at Elias. Elias froze, until Kale moved faster than he thought possible. The prince's body shielded him, silver fire erupting from his mouth. The blast struck Draven's chest, forcing him back, but not down. Draven roared. "Weak fire, weak prince!" His tail lashed out, striking Kale across the floor. The young dragon coughed blood, but pushed himself up again. Elias's legs shook. He had no claws, no fire, no wings. What could he do? Yet, deep inside, a voice whispered, "You saved him once. You can do it again." He grabbed a fallen spear from the floor, its weight heavy in his trembling hands. "You want me?" Elias shouted, surprising even himself. "Then face me." Draven's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the great elder looked almost amused. "Brave little mouse." He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Elias whole. One strike would end him. Yet Elias did not move. His knees wanted to buckle, his heart wanted to flee, but he stood. And that was when Kale struck. The young prince, battered but burning with fury, leapt from the ground. Silver fire roared from his chest, brighter and hotter than before. This time, Elias did not move aside. He held his ground, distracting Draven for that one fatal second. The fire struck true. Draven screamed as silver flames consumed his wings. He staggered back, roaring in pain, before collapsing against the throne he had tried to steal. His body smoldered, his eyes wide with disbelief. The chamber fell silent. Draven was defeated. Kale stood, panting, his body trembling but unbroken. He looked at Elias, who still clutched the spear though his arms shook. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were not needed. The Emperor stepped forward, blood still dripping from his wounds, but his voice strong. "Tonight we saw truth. Power is not only in fire, nor only in wings. Power lies in courage. This human stood when dragons fell." His gaze swept across the chamber. "Let this be remembered for all ages." Dragons lowered their heads, some in shame, others in respect. For the first time, Elias did not feel like a nobody. He felt seen. Later, as dawn painted the sky, Elias stood beside Kale on the palace balcony. Smoke still rose from the city, but peace had returned for now. Kale looked at him with a faint smile. "Do you still regret saving me?" Elias shook his head. "No. But I wonder, what happens now?" Kale's eyes turned to the horizon, glowing with firelight. "Now," he said softly, "a new story begins. A story where dragons and humans are not enemies, but something more." The wind carried their words into the morning sky. The Empire had changed forever, because a human nobody dared to step forward.